Running for governor? What did you say? You told me earlier. You told me earlier.
They would deport me.
No. Wow. I did want to talk to you briefly about tax reform and just a broader subject, really, because we all know the House of Representatives is about to pass their tax reform bill. I think the Senate bill probably in the next 2 weeks will be passed as well. Then it will head to reconciliation. And it's really going to provide, quite frankly, a huge boost, especially if we get corporate tax reform right away, as opposed to the Senate who wanted to put it off. Now we can talk about this in economic terms, but we also should talk about it in social terms. In economic terms, what you found is America's had, since the income tax and the corporate tax came in, 1906, the personal income tax in 1913, by the way, both of those you can blame on what?
Progressives. Progressives.
No. Yeah, Teddy Roosevelt.
Teddy Roosevelt
Was the one
yes.
who talked about irresponsible wealth, and that wound up leading to this. But what you have found is that the code has been abused for decades and decades. So when it came in 1913, just 4 years later, the Democrats had changed it under Woodrow Wilson. The top rate used to be 7% in 1913, and by 1918 it was 77%. In just 4 years. Under Truman it went to 94%. Right? So imagine if you're making money back then, taking all the risk, and your last dollar, 94% of it went to the federal government, and probably the rest went to the state government, wherever you were. So that's sort of a disincentive, do you think? Right? So, but what we found over the years is as they do that, and the economy gets weaker, when you do tax reform, you get this burst of energy, this burst of economic activity. So after it went to 77%, what happened was they cut it, and in 1923 the growth went from like 1 or 2% all the way up to 11.4% in 1923. Could you imagine economic growth? What are you all looking up there? Could you imagine if we today had 11% economic growth? The same thing happened in the 60s. It happened under Reagan eventually when all his tax cutting was in, and it happened in 2005, 6 as well. What happens is this pent-up energy gets released. The same thing's happening today. The left told everyone that, oh, we can't have 3% growth anymore. We have to settle for this new norm. Remember when Obama came in, what did they do? Did they cut taxes? No.
No.
They tried to spend $1 trillion, right? They threw everything at the economy they could, massive deficit spending. Oh, by the way, suddenly they're concerned about the deficit. Have you noticed that? National debt doubles under Obama, and suddenly become deficit hawks again. And the economy did what? It limped along. He's the first president in our history who's never had more than, or a single year at 3% growth. Why? Because quite frankly, there's too much government, and it's weighing the economy down. And so what we've had, and what you find, is, how are we doing this, Deborah? Are you putting it up?
It's not working.
It's not working. So you wonder why I brought these in? I put Lenson in charge. Sam, you see?
We want to see your password.
Unbelievable. Most people don't realize. Yeah, really, you want to see the password? Don't worry, Deborah. Most people don't realize the total amount of government we have. So I'll show it to you. Here it is. This is the chart of this is as a percent of the national economy. Okay, now the two big spikes. The first spike is World War I. The second spike is World War II. Right? Bob, you were there. What was that like? He was giving speeches back then. And today now, at the end, you can see it. It's about 37, 38% nationally. All right, that means 40% of the U.S. economy is government. Yep. It's the largest industry in America today. That would be by far. It's more than twice the size of the healthcare industry, right? That's a huge amount, but it's actually an understated amount. Because if you look at this chart and you put in the cost of regulations, anybody tell me what the total cost of federal regulations are a year before President Trump got in? Anyone? $2 trillion a year. Okay, just to give you a sense, that's more than 1/9 of the economy. In fact, if that was its own separate industry, it would be in the top 5. Then you have to throw on state regulations. Anybody know what the total cost of all the state regulations are? All 50 states? Anyone?
Yeah.
No, you're right, because it's never been added up. They've never done that study. The left doesn't want you to know it, the right hasn't focused enough on it. If you do add it in, what you wind up with is government, or the cost of government, over 50%. Just think about that. You wonder why the economy struggles? If I took 54% of your money, how many of you would be better off? Right? So, what's the proof that all this growth in government is hurting? Here, you want to come a little closer, Bob? Yeah, but I'm going to get you back for this. But I'm going to get Bob back first. Please give a round of applause to Carol Merrill. Remember her? There you go. Now I want you to think about this in terms. All right, two beautiful gentlemen here. I want you to put these two together and notice if you can, in your mind, because this is really hard for economists, in your mind, to figure out whether as this mountain grows, this one descends. Anybody? It's not really that difficult. It should not be. The more money I take from you, the less you spend, save, and invest, because you have less, and it will. So what we have over the last 60 years now is we used to have growth rates around 5% on average, and now it's at 2%, right? And a lot of this, you get these things, but a lot of this is really simple to figure out, and they don't. Sure, within any 1 year, there could be an event, there could be a hurricane.
This is President Obama right there.
you can, that was actually 2008, but that's okay, I appreciate it. You can figure this out, right? Now, so what do we do about all of this, right? Okay, you guys, you can, there you go. Let's give a round of applause. Seriously, what do we do to revive this? It's pretty simple. My friend Stephen Moore, the economist, likes one of my sayings about all of this. And I just want to give you a quick economics lesson. This should only last about 40 minutes. It lasts 10 words. You ready? 10 words. What are we doing? There you go. And if you understand this, you'll know more about economics than all of Washington, D.C. You ready? When the government takes your money, you don't have it. if I could have one of your cups there, I just want to give you another quick lesson and then
Better not drink my water.
Can I have water? This one there. All right.
Can you give a splash now?
This is is this Welcome to SeaWorld? We're trying to be topical.
All right.
Now this is another economics lesson. The left came up with this theory. Big government economists came up with this theory that if government spends the money, it has a greater economic impact than when private people do it. Right? Now, how many believe that?
No.
We'll just do this little test. This is the private sector. This is government. Taxation is when you take from the private sector and give it to the government sector. I have two mayors sitting in front of me telling me they're frugal, but here we go. This is called taxation. Are you ready? That's called government waste. Now here's the hard part. How many of you think there's more water in the two glasses than before I started? Anybody? Then you don't belong in Washington. Or really, maybe you do. Here, see, I added to your water.
Yeah, right. You are taking out.
To talk seriously for a moment here about the illogic of the left and what we need to talk to our neighbors, because I want you to talk to your neighbors about this. The left says that when you cut rates, people really don't change their behavior. Now that's their excuse for saying we need your money, okay? But we know this isn't true. How many of you shop at Macy's? Raise your hand. How many of you get emails from Macy's, right? Give them your email address. Those emails, Macy's has you trained. All the time they tell you sale begins Friday. How many of you go Thursday? If you go Thursday, it's higher price. You adjust your behavior to save $20. Now, if you cut tax rates from 39 to 20 and save businesses potentially millions, don't you think you would adjust your behavior, right? Just think about it in those terms. The left sometimes agrees that it changes behavior. You know what they call those taxes? Sin taxes.
Behavioral.
Sin taxes are as old as taxes themselves. Actually in Sumeria, they used to tax you if you got divorced. That was a, quote, disincentive to get a divorce, right? But we have sin taxes all the time. The English curbed alcoholism by putting so much tax on gin at one point in time. Now, they know that if you tax something too much, you'll do less. That's why they get the soda tax. They want to stop kids from being able to vote, right? Why don't they think that applies to income?
Because they believe it's theirs.
Yeah, well, in part. But the reality is if you tax something enough, you get less of it. And that's what's happening to income and wages. Which really brings me to our main topic. Because I get asked all the time. I can go deep into the changes that House is proposing. Like, I don't know, there's an incentive. If you're a business attorney for 30 years like me, and you work on mergers and acquisitions, you know there's an incentive now in the House Code to put more of to buy assets instead of stock and put more money down instead of later because you can write it off in the first year. And is that exciting? No. Right? But what we need to understand is this. Opportunity and social discord are opposite ends of the seesaw. Just keep that in mind. When opportunity is down, social discord is up. When opportunity is rising, social discord falls. Right? And it's a pretty simple thing. If you feel like you have control of your own future, you have the job, you have the opportunity to advance, you focus on yourself. Historically, what happens, though, is when you make governments so big, large governments have a lot in common throughout all of history. Lots of waste, lots of corruption, and very complex tax systems. Onerous tax systems, where people actually give up trying. At the height of the Roman Empire, the democratic phase, where we had politicians promising giving away food and it was called bread and circuses, right? Did you watch Gladiator, where he came in and he gave up 37 straight days? That was it. That's how you appeased the populace who didn't have jobs. And you gave away grain, and it was bread and circuses, right? Their taxes were so high that if you were a farmer, you weren't taxed on your yield, you were taxed on just the amount of land you had. So no matter what the weather did, you still paid the tax. And it got so bad that at one point it was called the deserti agrari, where 20% of all farmland was just abandoned. You would be the owner of it, and you would leave. And the cure for it was an emperor came along and offered 10 years, does sound familiar, 10 years no taxes if you'll take over the land and produce. We had a food crisis. Does all this kind of stuff sound familiar? Yeah. New York is offering 10 years free, no taxes. Same kind of thing. We have had 10 years of economic stagnation, growth under 2%. Just to get really technical with you.
12 years.
12 years. Under 2% growth equals social discord. Over 4% lessens it. right? And then the worst of it comes in with politicians. What do? If the economy's stagnated, people look to government to fix it. Can government fix the economy, Sam? Did it ever fix it where you're from? Of course not. It doesn't fix things. It institutionalizes problems, right? And so, what does this long-term no growth, no wage growth, people going to politicians do what? They tax people, they redistribute. And when you throw that brew together, what do you get? Intense political division. You get the have-nots fighting the haves. 45% of American families pay no income tax. The other 54 aren't happy about it. What's the cure for this? We're stuck in this problem. What's the cure? Well, we've been here before as a country. And that was what JFK and Reagan. People don't remember. I know Lenson worked on that. You walked precincts for JFK, didn't you?
Yeah.
When Lenson told me he liked Cleveland, I didn't realize he meant Grover.
Yeah, Cleveland Grover now.
People don't remember JFK got elected in very divisive times. He was the first American president in history to lose more states than he won. And his victory was very controversial because of Illinois and Cook County, where the mafia delivered a certain number of votes that probably weren't really there. But I know the left says there's no voter fraud, so it couldn't have been that. Right?
Yes.
So how did Kennedy address his division? The same way Reagan did. Reagan actually copied JFK, because Reagan took over in divisive times. I don't know if you remember, but back when Reagan was running for president, they said, well, maybe it takes 3 presidents now. Its job's too big. By the way, the federal government was 1/3 the size it is today when Reagan said government's not the solution. 1/3. Okay. So what did they do? What they didn't do, and I'll close with this and get to questions. They didn't say, let's do a federal program and tax somebody else to pay for it. In fact, between 1948, where's that? This is back, where's that chart? So this is 1948 right here, which is a trough in spending, right? Down in this range. Okay, good. So down in like this range, right? So World War II ends, they wind down the spending. Federal spending went in this from here at $3 billion a year to that peak at $39 billion, right? It wasn't government spending that got us out of the Great Depression, it was World War II. So from here to 61, government spending went up 250%. And JFK said, we tried spending. It didn't work. So what did he do? He said we need to cut taxes. Every dollar that's in someone's pocket, he used to talk about, can create a job somewhere. He set a national goal of reviving the economy, not through government programs, but through leaving money in people's hands so that their initiative would do it. Reagan did the same thing. He cut taxes. He didn't say government's going to bring us back. He said the American economy will. And that's what's about to happen now. But I still need all of you to either go to cafortaxrelief.org, call up Darrell Issa, who's got some concerns about the existing bill, but we need to leave more money in the private sector. We've tried all the spending. We know the results. Briefly on corporate tax reform. This alone will cause a mini boomlet. There is as much as $3 to $4 to $5 trillion overseas. We as a country have the most outdated corporate tax in the world. Not only is our top rate high at 39, but we have a worldwide tax system versus a territorial system. If you're in Germany and you're an American corporation, you get taxed the German rates, and if you bring the money home, you get taxed the American rates. That's not the way it works if you're a German company in America. In a German company in America, you may have to pay money here, but Germany gives you a break when you bring it back home. So what do? They bring it back home, right? Now, the size of the US economy is 18 trillion. If 5 trillion is overseas, and we move to this territorial methodology, and we have an interim period where it's taxed in America at 12%, $1, $2, $3 trillion coming home over the next 5 years is an enormous amount of money. With that alone would qualify as bigger than all but 2 tax cuts in American history. And it's not really a tax cut because it's private sector money coming in and washing on our shores and bringing the jobs back. You've heard of outsourcing? A good deal of that has to do with our terrible tax system and regulatory system. It would cause a mini boomlet. That's why I'm bullish that this can change. Not only have we done good regulatory things, that's why we've had 2/4 of 3% more than the left said could ever happen even if we had tax reform. But we will get this up around 4 and 5% for a couple of 3 years, and then you build on it. So what I'm hoping you do today, and we can make these, well, Deb's got these, just say to your friends, you know what, we tried all this. We tried the spending. They spent like mad. And as far as you here in San Diego, if you want to just talk to your neighbor, you know what you say? Do you have, down here you must have a buy local program. Have you heard that?
Yes.
Okay, then support tax reform, because more money will stay here in San Diego. 7 of the 10 richest counties in America are where? Surrounding Washington, D.C. What does that tell you? That Washington, D.C. is an industry, and we don't need to support it anymore. You should support your local industry. So buy local, support tax reform. Thank you very much.